Okay, so here's a quick one about world building. No, I'm not talking about the 800 hours you've spent in Minecraft, or those few hours spent in StarCraft's map editor back in the day, with ambitions of creating your very own epic sci-fi saga, only to give up a few minutes in and just put a bunch of burrowed zerglings everywhere. Not speaking from experience, of course. No, what I'm talking about is the narrative kind of world building. You know, you're writing a book, a script, or your very own epic Dungeons and Dragons saga, only to put random bandit encounters everywhere, and sooner rather than later you will have to really flesh out your world and show your audience what makes it different from the real world. Unless your story takes place in the real world, in which case, congrats, you just saved yourself a ton of trouble. Unless it takes place in the real world but has even just one unusual element to it, in which case you're back to square one. Sorry. Now, to demonstrate how drastically a few things can alter your setting, I'm going to talk about RWBY. Yes, RWBY, that show that apparently no one likes, yet everyone keeps watching. Yeah, that one. So, here's a quick heads up. In RWBY, there are these things called Grimm. They're pretty much edgy, bony counterparts to real-world animals. You have Grimm bears, Grimm wolves, Grimm crows, Grimm human torso fused together with a horse, that kind of thing. They have two main characteristics that make them incredibly dangerous. One is that they are in a constant state of aggression and pretty much kill any living thing that isn't another Grimm. Two, and here's where the interesting part comes in, they are drawn to negative emotions. Anger, fear, anxiety, and any feeling you would find in a late 90s metal album are pretty much Grimm magnets. The way it goes is simple. The more people start getting their knickers in a twist, the more likely all surrounding Grimm will notice and start stampeding towards the source. Now just imagine for a second, okay, you're done, how drastically that changes the world. Just a few examples. Substances such as alcohol, caffeine, and of course all mind-altering drugs would probably be highly regulated, if not outright banned, due to them raising the chances of altercations. Sure, a good old drunken tavern brawl is quite the inconvenience, but that gets promoted to, oh shit, we might have just doomed the whole town, when bloodthirsty monsters are drawn to such outbursts. Due to them being banned, an illegal market would have popped up to profit off of it. It would probably look like the Prohibition era, except you can add Monster energy drinks and double espressos next to the illegal whiskey. By contrast, depressants such as cigarettes, weed, or Xanax would be cheaper, readily available, and probably encouraged. It wouldn't be hard to imagine some cities keeping their populace heavily sedated to reduce the risk of attracting Grimm by suppressing any potential dangerous emotions, or as I like to call it, pulling an equilibrium. Things such as meditation, stoicism, and ambient music would not only be incredibly common, but could easily be mandatory in some places. Anything that can keep tension as low as possible would most likely be heavily ingrained in most of the world's cultures. Huge sport and music events would most likely not be very common, and even the security on it would make it nigh unenjoyable. People in the real world start rioting and looting when their team wins, let alone loses. So imagine how long a city would last if it had regular events of masses of people at an elevated emotional state with a high chance of fighting and rioting at the end. One delayed or god forbid cancelled rock concert and I guarantee you it's Grimm galore. Riots, uprising, and even protests would be far less common and dealt with completely differently, since if a huge group of people start to angrily parade in the streets, that would just attract something that is a danger to everything and everyone. The authorities would not just take people into custody, since even subdued or detained individuals still remain angry and agitated. Instead, police would rely on stun guns, knockout gas, and anything that would not only neutralize a person as a threat, but also sedate them enough to not get the attention of Grimm. When riots do break out, there would be a significant portion of the populace doing their damnedest to try to quell it as fast as possible, since even if they agree with the angry mob du jour, they can overcome their impulses and recognize the possibility of a greater calamity occurring. Certain groups or factions would be prepared and ready to assist in any way they can with calming the populace, or at the very least keep the hysteria from spreading. Leaders would probably even take advantage of the fact that riots and protests are ill-advised and try to test the limits of their abuse of power. Some cities might take advantage of the Grimm's instinctual attraction to tension, outrage, and hostility and gather a group of people in a designated area, start marathoning Game of Thrones, and when the last episode ends, the well-prepared military could take out scores of Grimm that appear drawn to the sudden feelings of total annoyance. Something like this could easily become a regular thing in many cultures, both as a way to cleanse the surrounding area of accumulated Grimm, and as a way to allow a part of the population to let off some steam, like a more productive and tactical purge. I'm guessing wars would either be over real quick, since an uninvited third party would always be just around the corner, or avoided altogether in favor of sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Now, these are just a few of the things that would be heavily affected by the existence of such creatures as the Grimm. Sadly, RWBY does none of these. Substances are pretty much left alone, as we're shown not one but two characters who appear to have a serious addiction to caffeine and alcohol respectively. No city, town, or settlement appears to have any particular plans, precautions, and preparations against the Grimm invasion, except for the usual array of guards with guns. Nothing is shown to help or encourage a populace keep a level head. People appear just as lively or confrontational as any, and during smaller conflicts or altercations, nobody seems concerned that this might get out of hand and thus draw the creatures of Grimm. Not only are huge events alive and well, there are annual tournaments, because of course they are, where people beat each other up in front of a huge crowd that is also broadcast around the world. And when something outrageous happens during one of these events and the audiences become infuriated, we're never shown anyone in power making sure that no Grimm are on their way. During riots, the aforementioned guards with guns is the preferred method of calming the people, who seem completely oblivious to the fact that them angrily rampaging in the streets has a good chance of making tonight's riot escalate into something more than they bargained for. It's not that people would be in complete control of their emotions at all times, rather that we're never shown those who acknowledge the danger and futility of such an act. The villains appear to be aware of this phenomenon, using it to their advantage to cause chaos and distraction, yet everyone else kinda only thinks about it when it's already too late. It would be fine if the Grimm were something that appeared recently, say 2 or 3 years ago, but it is established that these beings have been around for centuries, if not since the dawn of time. Any civilization would have to adapt to such a malevolent presence or otherwise go extinct. It's not that riots, outrage, and emotions running high could never occur in a world like this, just that the viewer has to be shown that, yes, people are aware of these things, are working hard to deal with them, but gosh darn it, those bad guys are just too cunning. Because without that, it just seems like everyone kind of forgot about one of the most important aspects of the world they inhabit, and by extension makes a potentially unique and interesting setting feel just like any other, since it lacks the key features to make it really distinct. Pretty much anything you as a writer come up with that diverges heavily from our own world has to be put through the ringer, examining how it would or would not affect things such as culture, religion, economy, way of life, social interactions, traditions, and anything else I'm too lazy to mention. Anyways, I just wanted to brainstorm on world building a bit, which if you're into, you owe it to yourself to check out some of the lectures of Brandon Sanderson. If you like this video, then please imagine a world where people don't have to beg for likes and subscribes, and let me know what you came up with, cause I sure as hell can picture such a thing. Thanks!